Frédéric Vasseur has uncovered shocking irregularities inside Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari SF25. Data showed configurations that Ferrari engineers had ignored, exposed by Hamilton's relentless simulator work. Vasseur realized his own car was being sabotaged by the very system Ferrari trusted most. Now, with Singapore approaching, the Scuderia faces a civil war of philosophy and survival. Baku exposed Ferrari's contradictions with painful clarity. On Friday, Lewis Hamilton looked capable of fighting for pole, his SF25 finally alive in free practice. By Saturday, he was eliminated in Q2, and by Sunday, he was dragging the car to 8th place with pure skill rather than machinery. For Ferrari, this was not a blip. It was the symptom of something deeper, a truth that Frédéric Vasseur could not ignore. The promise of pace was real, but the delivery was broken. When Vasseur reviewed Hamilton's car, he found the scandal hidden in plain sight. The simulator, the crown jewel of Maranello, had been producing lies. Suspension stability, tire life, aerodynamic balance, all projected with confidence, all false when tested on track. Hamilton had not just suffered those failures, he had already adapted to them. Vasseur realized that Hamilton's data was full of configurations Ferrari had not designed, but that he had invented himself. The shock was not the simulator's flaws. It was that Hamilton had already outsmarted them. The raw data told the story. Hamilton had logged 12-hour simulator sessions, dissecting patterns of failure and turning false predictions into actionable setups. Softer suspension for curbs, cooling systems retuned for humidity, aero trim for stability over speed. These were not the products of Ferrari's simulator. They were Hamilton's counterpunch. Vasseur, staring at the numbers, understood that Ferrari's competitiveness in Singapore would not come from its technology. It would come from Hamilton's defiance. That was a revelation as humbling as it was inspiring. The scandal for Ferrari runs deeper than lost performance. It undermines their very identity as a team built on engineering supremacy. For decades, Ferrari's prestige has rested on its ability to blend drivers with machinery of unmatched quality. Now the truth is inverted. The machinery is broken, and only the driver is keeping Ferrari alive. For Vasseur, this changes the power dynamic entirely. Hamilton is not just the face of Ferrari. He has become its savior and its greatest critic. Singapore, then, is not merely another race. Is Ferrari's trial by fire. If Hamilton's radical setups succeed, Ferrari will taste redemption, but only by admitting that their systems were wrong and their driver was right. If they fail, the humiliation will be brutal, confirming that the Scuderia has lost its way completely. For Vasseur, the stakes are personal. His leadership will be judged not just on results, but on whether he has the courage to trust Hamilton over Ferrari's technology. Baku was meant to be Ferrari's statement of intent. Lewis Hamilton topped free practice, finally feeling that the SF25 could fight for pole position. The optimism was tangible. The paddock sensed something had changed. Yet by Saturday afternoon, the dream was over. Hamilton was eliminated in Q2, stranded in 12th place, his voice sharp with frustration. By Sunday, after wrestling the car to 8th, the optimism had turned into another familiar disappointment. The cracks were no longer whispers. They were visible, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Frédéric Vasseur, Ferrari's team principal, demanded answers. Post-race reviews revealed a disturbing pattern. The simulator, Ferrari's prized tool in Maranello, had projected stability, grip, and tire life that never appeared in reality. The system Ferrari trusted above all had been lying to them. The engineers had followed the numbers faithfully, but those numbers had betrayed them. For Vasseur, who built his reputation on discipline and clarity, this was more than a setback. It was a scandal. Hamilton, however, had already seen what Vasseur was only beginning to grasp. Hours inside the simulator had revealed to him that the mathematical model was broken. Grip curves, suspension loads, and tire degradation forecasts looked flawless in simulation, but collapsed on track. Hamilton, drawing on 2 decades of experience, inverted the system's lies, creating setups that compensated for its flaws. Vasseur, reviewing Hamilton's data after Baku, saw not chaos but a method. What Ferrari's engineers missed, their driver had already mapped with precision. The discovery left Vasseur in shock. Ferrari had invested millions into a tool that had undermined their season. Yet Hamilton's defiance had turned those failures into assets. His simulator sessions, stretching to 12 hours, had produced radical configurations that made sense not because the simulator said so, but because Hamilton had translated its lies into truth. Suspension softened for curbs, cooling calibrated for humidity, and balance prioritized for stability, all designed with Singapore in mind. Vasseur now understood. Hamilton had built a Ferrari the engineers could not. For Ferrari, this revelation was both a gift and humiliation. The gift was that Hamilton's work offered a lifeline for Singapore, a circuit that exposes instability more than any other. The humiliation was that their own systems, their own engineers, had failed to provide solutions. Vasseur's leadership now stood at a crossroads. Should he embrace Hamilton's rebellion, risking the prestige of Ferrari's technology? Or should he protect the institution, even if it meant sacrificing performance? The stakes were suddenly larger than a single race. And now all roads lead to Marina Bay. Hamilton arrives armed with setups born not of Ferrari's simulator, but of his own defiance. Vasseur arrives knowing the truth, that what he found in Hamilton's car changes everything. Singapore will no longer be just a Grand Prix. It will be a referendum on Ferrari's future. Will they trust instinct over machinery, or continue down a path where their own crown jewel betrays them? The lights of Marina Bay will provide the answer. This is only the beginning. Hamilton's own words in Baku still resonate. I felt like I could fight for pole today. I have not felt that all year. That sense of possibility was rare, and it meant Ferrari had shown him glimpses of potential. Yet those hopes dissolved in qualifying, where he was eliminated in Q2. For a driver of Hamilton's caliber, to start 12th on the grid was not just frustrating, it was evidence that Ferrari's promises were illusions. Vasseur, reviewing the session, realized the gap between simulator forecasts and reality was no longer a problem to manage. It was a crisis. On race day, Hamilton pushed the SF-25 as far as it would go. He fought through the pack to 8th place, but the performance was hollow. The car slid in slower corners, its rear axle unpredictable, tires overheating far sooner than the data had predicted. Ferrari's simulator had projected a machine capable of managing degradation better than rivals. In reality, Hamilton was forced into survival mode. The mismatch between expectation and reality was glaring, and Vasseur saw it in every lap time and every sector. The technical reviews after Baku were damning. Suspension modeling in the simulator was miscalibrated, producing setups that destabilized the car under braking. Tire degradation curves were completely unreliable, suggesting longer stints that never materialized. Engineers had prepared Hamilton for a race strategy based on phantom numbers. He, however, had endured the reality of a car that punished him with unpredictability. Vasseur, dissecting the data, understood the scale of the scandal. Ferrari's own technology had betrayed their champion, sending him into battle with weapons that did not exist. Hamilton's resilience masked the truth. By adapting his driving mid-race, he salvaged 8th and avoided a total collapse. But his radio messages and post-race comments revealed the truth. Execution needed to be better, he said, a diplomatic way of pointing the finger at Ferrari's systemic flaws. Vasseur took those words seriously. This was not a driver making excuses. This was a 7-time world champion identifying that the foundation of Ferrari's preparation was rotten. And when Hamilton speaks with that tone, the team must listen. The outside world reacted with brutal clarity. Jacques Villeneuve summed it up. Ferrari is completely lost. Hamilton played it well. The verdict was harsh, but undeniable. For a team that prides itself on engineering excellence, to be labeled lost by a former champion was devastating. Vasseur could not brush it aside. Ferrari had invested millions in a simulator that had become an enemy rather than an ally. The scandal was no longer confined to the garage. It had become a paddock-wide narrative. And reputations, once broken, are hard to repair. And here lies the most shocking element of Vasseur's discovery. Hamilton had not simply survived Ferrari's failures. He had outsmarted them. The data in his car revealed radical configurations, suspension tweaks, cooling adjustments, aerodynamic balances that did not come from Ferrari's simulator at all. They came from Hamilton himself, reverse-engineered through hours of relentless work. Vasseur realized that the only reason Ferrari still looked remotely competitive was because Hamilton had been rewriting the playbook alone. That discovery shook Maranello to its core. The scandal Vasseur uncovered was rooted in Ferrari's simulator itself. At the heart of it lies a multi-body mathematical model designed to predict how the SF-25 should behave across every circuit condition. In theory, it should anticipate suspension responses, tire wear, aero loads, and fuel balance. In practice, it was riddled with inconsistencies. On screen, the car looked stable, efficient, and reliable. On track, it was nervous, fragile, and unpredictable. Vasseur realized what Hamilton had already known for weeks. Ferrari's engineers had been building their race weekends on a foundation of sand. What stunned Vasseur most was how Hamilton responded. Where engineers trusted the simulator blindly, Hamilton treated it as a liar to be decoded. He inverted its predictions, assuming understeer where it promised grip, preparing for early tire where it claimed longevity. It was a method that turned every false output into a warning sign. Hamilton was not just a driver anymore. He had become Ferrari's interpreter of chaos. Vasseur, combing through the car data, saw a driver doing the work of an entire technical department. Hamilton's simulator sessions told the same story. Up to 12 hours at a time, he dissected every configuration. Suspension loads were tested at varying ride heights, tire degradation simulated under tropical conditions, and braking models adapted for high downforce corners. Each time the simulator contradicted reality, Hamilton logged the divergence and recalibrated his expectations. Over time, he built a map of Ferrari's flaws, a private reference that allowed him to craft setups Ferrari's own tools could not deliver. For Vasseur, the discovery was both a revelation and an embarrassment. His driver had done the work his engineers should have. The focus of Hamilton's work was Marina Bay. Singapore demands precision like no other. The track's 19 corners punish instability. Its humid air strains cooling systems, and its relentless distance exposes tire weaknesses. Hamilton used the simulator's failures as breadcrumbs to create solutions: softer suspension to survive the curbs, cooling strategies tailored for the suffocating heat, and aerodynamic balances that favored predictability over straight-line speed. Vasseur, seeing these setups in Hamilton's car, realized they were not the product of Ferrari systems at all. They were the product of Hamilton's defiance. To Ferrari's engineers, the configurations looked unconventional, even illogical. Sacrificing marginal top speed for greater stability, reducing aggressiveness in aero to save tire life. These were decisions that contradicted the simulator's recommendations. But Vasseur could not ignore the results. Hamilton's car, though still imperfect, felt more composed, more drivable, more predictable. It was as though he had bypassed Ferrari's machinery and built a philosophy of his own. The data made it clear. Hamilton was not just driving Ferrari's car, he was redesigning it in real time. And that is the true scandal. Vasseur discovered that Hamilton had been quietly compensating for Ferrari's systemic failures, turning their flawed simulator into a roadmap of what not to do. In doing so, he exposed the weakness of Ferrari's engineering culture, which had trusted machines over instinct. Now, heading into Singapore, the only competitive package Ferrari carries is the one Hamilton himself designed. For Vasseur, this changes everything. His leadership is no longer about enforcing Ferrari systems, but about deciding whether to embrace Hamilton's rebellion as the team's salvation or risk losing him entirely. The twist Vasseur uncovered was brutal in its implications. Ferrari had already frozen development of the SF25, redirecting resources toward the 2026 project. That meant no new upgrades, no fresh solutions, and no cavalry from Maranello. For Hamilton, it left only one path forward, his own radical setups, born from decoding Ferrari's broken simulator. For Vasseur, it meant admitting that the only hope Ferrari carried into Singapore came not from its engineers, but from its driver. That realization turned admiration into unease. The risk hanging over Marina Bay is monumental. Singapore is the longest, most punishing night race on the calendar. 19 corners demand consistency. Curbs punish weak suspension, and humidity pushes cooling systems to their limits. If Hamilton's setups fail, Ferrari will stand humiliated, exposed as a team unable to support even a 7-time world champion. Vasseur knows the cost will not be just lost points, it will be a public indictment of Ferrari's leadership. Hamilton's Singapore package itself defies Ferrari convention. Instead of chasing outright speed, he has prioritized stability, control, and tire management. Suspension has been softened to tame the curbs, cooling systems recalibrated for the sweltering humidity, and aerodynamic balance tilted toward predictability. These are not Ferrari's solutions. They are Hamilton's. Vasseur, reading the data, saw a car that finally looked consistent. But he also saw the political problem. If Hamilton succeeds, Ferrari's engineers are exposed as redundant. If he fails, Hamilton's rebellion becomes a liability. For Vasseur personally, the dilemma is existential. Ferrari hired Hamilton not just for his driving, but for the aura of leadership he brings. Now that very aura threatens to overshadow Ferrari's institutional pride. If Hamilton's configurations deliver, Vasseur will be forced to admit that his driver outthought the very systems Ferrari trusted most. If they fail, Vasseur risks being accused of letting a single man dictate the team's direction. Either way, the power balance inside Maranello will never be the same again. The symbolism of Singapore adds to the drama. It is one of Hamilton's strongest circuits, a place where he has triumphed before by mastering its unique demands. For him to deliver here, with a Ferrari many believe broken, would send shockwaves through the sport. It would prove that instinct, experience, and resilience can overcome technology's betrayal. For Vasseur, that outcome is both salvation and humiliation. He would celebrate the result while knowing it was achieved in spite of Ferrari's systems, not because of them. And so the dramatic twist sharpens into focus. Ferrari's future in Singapore is not built on their simulator, their engineers, or their factory. It is built on the defiance of one man. Vasseur has discovered that Hamilton's rebellion is Ferrari's only hope. If it succeeds, Ferrari will be forced to confront its failures and admit the power of human instinct. If it fails, the Scuderia will be laid bare as a team lost in its own illusions. Marina Bay will decide which truth survives.